What if I told you the biggest mistake you made in your fantasy draft was wide receiver? Today, I'm going to show you the five I bet everything on this year and why they're the ones you should trade for before week one. By the way, I'm Joe. I've done over a billion views in sports over the last decade, but more importantly, I've helped thousands of people just like you win their fantasy league. The way I like to structure these videos is always the same. First, I'm going to start every video with the top NFL news stories, and then we're going to give them a little bit of a fantasy spin for you guys as well, just to deliver some value right off the bat. And then I'm going to answer my top five YouTube comments that I've seen on some videos over the last few days, just to reward some positivity and smart questions in every video. That's also a little bit of an engagement hack because the more comments that I get on these YouTube videos, the more that they're going to boost it to more people. And then I'm going to jump into today's one key topic. So exactly what you came here for. The goal is to always deliver on every single click. So later in this video, I'm going to prove to you that you drafted the wrong wide receivers. I'm going to tell you the five that I bet everything on this year. And if you don't have them, why I'd recommend trading for them before week one. Sound good? All right, let's jump right into the news. And we're going to start with Travion Henderson. So they've already gone out and said that he could get half the carries. So that's something that we're definitely looking at in this backfield. We'll see what happens with Ramondre Stevenson. But if we do end up getting half the carries, that's a good situation for a guy that's going to be making a ton of big plays. So I really like that news for Travion Henderson. Wouldn't be surprised if he earns more work than that before long. Juwan Jennings is a weird one, guys. This is one that I've been kind of looking at over the last few days, even just yesterday, the 24th. Kyle Shanahan said that he expects wide receiver Juwan Jennings to be ready for week one. So to me, that's him saying that he might be ready for week one. So that's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. These calf injuries are scary. Shanahan himself talked about that. So today, Juwan Jennings missed practice again. So we'll see. Could he be placed on the IR? That could definitely happen. Some contract disputes here as well that we definitely have to bake in mind. But the Juwan Jennings stuff definitely has a pretty big impact on what we think of Christian McCaffrey, Ricky Pearsall, and our boy George Kittle. So let's keep an eye on that. Matthew Stafford, another guy that we're keeping an eye on. One of the guys that I really like this year is Devontae Adams. Of course, everyone loves Puka Nacua, but both of those players, it's going to depend on how healthy Matthew Stafford is. He did participate in practice Monday. So returning to the practice field last week as they're kind of taking it easy on him. That's good to know. It looks like they believe that he's going to be ready to roll in week one. So that's great news for the Rams and for their offense. Terry McLaurin finally gets his deal worth over $96 million with the Commanders. So I'm not sure why it took so long for this to get done, but 3 hours ago we did get that. So hopefully we'll have put that behind us and we can start to look towards this next year with Terry McLaurin. Obviously scored a ton of touchdowns for us last year. So now his average salary is now at $32 million. Basically the same as AJ Brown, less than only Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, DK Metcalf, Garrett Wilson. Interesting. There was some mutterings out there that he was asking for more than DK Metcalf. So good thing, I guess, that Terry kind of came to his senses on that one. Joe Mixon said a tough, complicated rehab. We know this, guys. We've been looking at this all offseason. Nick Chubb behind him, not going to bring a ton of explosiveness. There's a lot to dig into here, but a guy like this who had so much tread on the tires last year is not someone that I really want to make a bet on going into the year, basically hurt again. They also have one of the worst offensive lines in football. So I don't have Joe Mixon basically anywhere at this point. So hopefully you guys are with me on that. Travis Etienne, this is an interesting one, right? So surprising news out of Jacksonville. Etienne might actually be on the trade block. It looks like the Jaguars are shopping either Etienne or Tank Bigsby ahead of that final roster cut. So if no deal happens, both would stay, obviously, but one of the rookies, Bashal Tutin or LaQuint Allen Jr., more likely to be inactive on game day. So some Tutin news here, another one of those late round flyers that we like. Pretty big, though, because Etienne was like that passing down back in the preseason. But if he's moved, Tutin definitely becomes even more interesting. So keeping an eye on this Etienne stuff pretty closely. And then Najee Harris, one of those things where we've been kind of monitoring this as well for Omari and Hampton, but also he could play in week one, which is kind of interesting. Again, similar to Jennings, he still may not play, right? So it doesn't really tell us one way or the other there. But 10 weeks since the eye injury would be week one. So that would make sense. There's a shot. Definitely. Could still end up on the pup, the IR, or even be full go in week one. Who knows? We'll see. I'm still drafting with caution for sure, but he's never missed a game in his entire career. So that's something to keep in mind. All right. What I would like to do now is jump into some questions. So, like I said, if you're watching this video, you're watching my channel for the first time, kind of switching up some format a little bit so that I can get you guys more of these videos. And I think it'd be kind of fun to answer more of your guys' questions along the way as well. So, how we're going to do that is underneath this video, tomorrow when I make another video, I'm going to check the best comments from this video, just again to try and hopefully encourage some positivity in the comments and also kind of supercharge these videos this time of the year. If you're looking for some like specific, what would I do in X round, what players I like in each round, the video that I dropped on Saturday is trending to be one of our highest viewed videos of all time. Basically, a round by round blueprint on what I'm doing in fantasy drafts. So definitely take an eye, or you should definitely check that one out if you have any specific questions. Spend a lot of time on that video, but this is the format going forward. We're going to try and do these three things every single day for the foreseeable future. And a part of that I think is going to be really fun is getting to some questions. So let's do that. So these are the 5 questions that I've picked for today. And then I've got a handy dandy marker now as well. So this will be fun. Okay. Question number 1. Appreciate the advice, but Chris Boswell won me games weeks he had over 20 points. I'm going to take him as soon as it feels like kickers are getting snatched. Yeah, I saw this comment on the video with the round by round stuff. Guys, okay. I'm going to keep this short. Kickers offer the least edge in all of fantasy. Last year, fewer than 3 points separated kicker 1 from kicker 12. So again, going to throw this back on the screen. We're not reaching for kicker, guys. If you are still playing in a league with kickers, I apologize. But yeah, I don't think we need to spend any more time on that. I picked 7 in a 12-man full PPR starting 8 league. 2 flex, 2 wide receiver. Would you rather have CMC or one of the wide receivers? Yeah, for me, this one, I would rather have CD or Jefferson than CMC in that case. I know that it does matter a little bit in terms of what positions you have to start, but for me, CD and Jefferson slightly above CMC. Love both those guys. And we'll get to another question in a second where I talk about which one I like better. But if I have the 102 and want Bijan, is it dumb to draft both London and Bijan? So yeah, this is kind of just like a correlation question, right? So for the Falcons in particular, they are a team that I do want to try and get as many combinations of as I can, especially if you're playing best ball stuff. They're a team that's going to play up tempo. They're a team that was both top 10 or that was top 10 in both combined snaps and total points. They also have one of the easiest strengths of schedules in terms of rushing. So Bijan obviously is an amazing pick at the 102. Totally agree with that. But the question is, can you draft London in likely the late second or so? And I say yes. I think both of these guys can definitely eat on the same team. Don't forget when London went absolutely crazy last year, it was when Penix was the quarterback. So we'll get that from the start. So the answer to that for me is yes. I actually like correlation, especially if you're looking into some best ball stuff, but I kind of think it's underrated in traditional fantasy leagues as well. Do you think Achan will be available to start the season? Yeah, I've actually been seeing this question quite a bit across short form, but also seeing it on some of the long form stuff as well. I am more likely to believe Mike McDaniel on this one, as he's already saying it's kind of a preventative thing. I like coaches that if their team's banged up, they're not going to force them into a situation in training camp or preseason. Calves are the ones that are a little bit scary. I will preface with that. But it's good that they're being proactive about it, right? Especially with an explosive player like him. So I'm not worried if HN's going to be available. It looks like he still should be. But the Achilles stuff always like freaks me out now with the calf issue. So to be completely transparent, in drafts lately, I have taken a little bit less of HN, but that's probably just a bias more than anything. I haven't moved him in my rankings just yet. Teased it before, but Jefferson over CD, giving Jefferson's injury is minor. Yeah, again, I'm not super worried about Jefferson's injury, but I have moved CD ahead of Jefferson for quite a while now. I think part of that has to do with obviously what we're going to get with a healthy Dak, the addition of Pickens, fast paced offense in general is something that I think gives CD the edge. Love both these guys. They're going where they are for a reason. I just said that I would take both of them over Christian McCaffrey. The hamstring is just a little bit concerning because obviously that's something that Jefferson has battled in the past. It does seem to be kind of a mild tweak that he had in camp, but they've been doing everything they can to basically get him back for week one. But it looks like he will practice this week as well. So that's something that I do really like to see, obviously, with the Jefferson stuff. So love both these guys. I think it's very close. But if I had to choose one, I would say that Jefferson is my preference. So if I didn't get to your question today, now's a good time to remind you that I do have a membership community called the Fantasy Accelerator. That's where I do answer every question. So I'll just give you everything else you need to win your league as well. You can check it out, fantasyaccelerator.com. First link in the description. See if it's for you. But if you're not ready yet for the full draft kit, you can still get my top 150 rankings totally free at top150free.com. It's the exact list that I'm using in every draft this year. So now we're going to get into the fun part of this. We're going to talk through some wide receivers, specifically 5 wide receivers that I think you should have drafted this year. And if you haven't, ones that you should be prioritizing heavily to get before your season starts. Let's grab our pen here. We're going to have 5 receivers today. Still getting used to the whiteboard, but I think the whiteboard thing is actually pretty cool. Let's do this. There we go. Give ourselves some space here. All right. Wide receiver number 1, if you've been watching my content all offseason, you're not going to be surprised to see Calvin Ridley here. Let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Cool. And then I want to add some notes for each of these players as well. So probably should have moved these a little bit. Why is that happening? There we go. All right. Let's talk about Calvin Ridley. So he's going to be my first player that I'm trying to leave every draft with. Calvin Ridley going at the overall like 66 pick, mid 6th round. Some of the things when I'm just looking at this team overall that I want to highlight. Let's zoom in a little bit here. So Calvin Ridley. Let's go back to our pen here. All right, sweet. Calvin Ridley, one of the things that I want to mention right off the bat is that this offensive line has vastly improved this year. So, a couple upgrades. It was one of the teams that this was a really big issue for last year. Now, I would say, if anything, they're kind of like mid of the pack or slightly better than average. So, that's a huge bull signal for a guy like Calvin Ridley, who can obviously get downfield. This is also a team that is projected to do a decent amount of passing. Obviously, their quarterback at number 1 overall, Cam Ward. So Cam Ward is someone that I think really matters for this. He's probably one of like the lowest hype players I've ever seen at the number 1 overall pick. But the thing that I really like about him in general is he throws a very accurate deep ball. Basically what Ridley didn't have last year. So if we're just looking at that alone in the amount of uncatchable targets that Ridley had last year. So those are targets. That's basically where he got open, where he won, but the ball was nowhere near catchable, right? So that's something that I think we're going to see right away improve. Obviously, that depends on how their chemistry goes. Ridley's right next to Ward's locker, all that good stuff. Ward has already called Ridley a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL, if not the best, which is a pretty crazy comment to make, but you love to see that he has a lot of faith in Calvin Ridley, and definitely a guy from a talent perspective that we've really liked over the years. Shout out Matt Harmon and his reception perception. I know he's a big Calvin Ridley guy as well. So the only thing, I guess, on the news side of things, he did leave a practice with like some cramps at practice. So not too worried about that. Some of the stats that I really thought were interesting last year. So he was the wide receiver 30 but he led the league in air yards. So if he ends up getting those type of targets again, those high quality targets, we could see obviously a lot more upside from Ridley than we saw last year. The nice part about even the other side of that is they have been kind of moving him all over the field. I don't think he's just going to get deep ball stuff, but fifth most deep ball receptions in 2024, career high 15.9 yards per route. That's definitely something that we like, but something that doesn't get talked about a lot here with Ridley is his contested catchability. Really strong last year, jumped to an 81.8% career high. Pretty big leap from like those 50% ranges we've seen in the past for him. And then again, talking about some of the stuff that Matt Harmon uncovered with his reception perception, but his press coverage success rate surged to an 85th percentile score last year. So I really like that. So if he ends up getting some more types of routes than some of the stuff that he was just seeing downfield, really like it. We're going to project him kind of for like that 115 to 125 range in terms of targets, but he's a locked in wide receiver one on this team that should be very, very improved. If you want to kind of compare him to someone and what the ceiling could look like, it's probably a mixture between Nico Collins and Terry McLaurin on the ceiling side. So if we see a lot of an upgrade at quarterback, really like this. So at this point of the draft, I think you can grab a guy like this and get a ton of upside from him. Definitely one of my main targets, and someone that I'm basically saying if you don't have him, you drafted the wrong wide receivers, because he's one of those guys that I'm trying to leave every draft with. Cool. Let's move on to this next guy. Our next guy is someone that the comments don't typically like when I bring up. But let's talk about DJ Moore, friends. DJ Moore. So in terms of offensive line, again, I always want to kind of start with that, because that's one of the things that we're really looking for if we're trying to increase our efficiency on offense in general. They might have one of the most improved offensive lines in the entire league. I think you can put them borderline top five in terms of their offensive line now. Obviously, Ben Johnson is the big news here. Basically what we're going to see is a huge leap in terms of just this team overall, in terms of like how they're going to get DJ Moore the ball, how they're going to move up and down the field in general. The biggest knock, I would say, against DJ Moore, now I'm clicking stuff, against DJ Moore is it's actually relatively crowded. So Burden, who they took with a high pick, Odunze, Loveland, like there is some people that could be taking targets here, but no more Keenan Allen. So I would say that the targets are somewhat in flux, but I would not be surprised to see DJ Moore have a pretty decent bounce back season. So we'll see. The body language stuff, I suppose you could put in this argument as well against him. But that type of thing seems like a little bit more narrative than anything else. I think now that we're going to Caleb Williams, not in his rookie year. Obviously, both these guys should have a lot of optimism in terms of what Ben Johnson is going to do for this offense. So I am on board. Wide receiver 17 finish last year. This is one of my favorite stats I've seen. He was the wide receiver 17, but he only had 4 top 17 weekly games. So didn't have a ton of like massive spikes, but the ones that he did have were huge, right? So hopefully we get a little bit more of that floor this year and we still grab some of those spikes. The efficiency last year was concerning. Only 6 TDs, 10 yards per route run, which is pretty low in comparison to what he has before. But what people aren't talking about still with him, let's zoom out a tad here, is the efficiency stuff in terms of the yards after catch was still very, very, very strong. So yards after the catch last year, third in the NFL. So we'll get that. I mentioned Keenan Allen, 120 vacated targets. 120. Up for grabs. Very interesting. So if we end up getting like again like 110 targets for him with this type of yards after catch ability, I just think he's being drafted near his floor without people taking into consideration what his ceiling could look like if things go well, right? So I'm a big fan of him, especially at this point of your draft. I think if you're going to get grab like a guy in the late fourth round, I've seen him like basically fall into the fifth in some spots as well. He's a slam dunk at wide receiver. All right, let's move on to my next guy here. This is one that you guys have probably heard me talk about quite a bit this offseason as well. But he's one of those guys, again, that if you didn't draft him, you drafted the wrong wide receivers. Emeka Egbuka. How do I make this bigger? There we go. Emeka Egbuka. Let's talk about him for a second. So currently, you can get him around the. Let's go back to our pen here. Currently get him in the eighth round, sometimes the end of the eighth round, around pick 93 overall. Obviously, this Tampa Bay team, when they have a fully healthy offensive line, I know we've talked about that for some of these other guys. They do have some injuries there, Tristan Wirfs. So we are going to probably downgrade that a little bit. But this is one of those situations now where I actually think that the Wirfs injury could actually lead to more targets for Ibuka. Because where is he going to get his usage? It's going to be in the slot. And when we don't have, that's interesting. When we don't have Chris Godwin at full health and Emeka Egbuka, where he ate in college, was in the slot, where are you going to, I guess, where is going to be a comfortable spot for Baker to be throwing to when his offensive line isn't at full strength? It's going to be in the slot. So I actually think that it's kind of a bull case for him seeing even more volume in the very beginning. Evans obviously is 32. He has a history of hamstring injuries. Godwin's returning from that ankle fibula surgery. McMillan's an interesting one as well, but every indication, at least in the news, is that Egbuka is going to have a huge role even after Godwin returns. At Ohio State, 74 for 1,151 yards and 10 touchdowns as a sophomore. So 81% of his snaps were in the slot. I keep clicking this, and then that makes it happen. There we go. Cool. All right. What else do we have here? Contested catch rate looks really strong. One of those things too, where like at his ADP right now, obviously it's jumped quite a bit since we started talking about him early in the offseason. I still think he's underpriced. If either Evans' age finally catches up with him, or maybe Godwin's ankle isn't where it needs to be when he comes back, if like any of those things happen, we have a lot of people that are comparing Egbuka to like, at least stylistically, to someone like Amon-Ra St. Brown. So he's severely undervalued based on just the volume that he should see out of the gate, the draft capital. So regardless of it being kind of a crowded wide receiver room, I still think that this is one of these ones where, I mean, Baker's already called him the real deal, that he could use him anywhere on the field. So I think if one of those things happens, Evans or Godwin take even just like a small step back, then why does this keep happening? There we go. Might have to get off my wallet and stop paying for the trial of this. Anyways, we're going to see a lot of Egbuka shares look really good at this part of the draft. So even if you can grab him in the eighth, I'm kind of taking him every time in the ninth right now, though. Cool. So that's our third. So we got Calvin Ridley, DJ Moore, Emeka Egbuka. We got two more guys to talk about here today. We already kind of alluded to this one earlier. Let's see if that's just going to keep happening. You're out of free shapes for this document. Oh, okay. Interesting. Let's delete some of these. That's what's happening. All right. We already got the questions out of the way. So let's see if that helps. We got there. We'll get that upgraded after this. George Pickens. Let's talk about George Pickens. Overall, 67th is where you have to take him, mid sixth round. He's another one of those guys, too, that I'm trying to leave every draft with. And if you don't have Pickens on the majority of your teams, I think you drafted the wrong wide receivers, and you should be trying to trade for Pickens as quickly as possible. But let's talk a little bit more about why. So, Pickens. All right. Obviously, we know CD is going to do his thing underneath. We are going to get the second fastest in neutral paced offense with George Pickens. So, second fastest pace. Obviously, that's a huge, huge upgrade. So, I can't even type on this anymore. All right. Let's do this. Let's delete this for now. Boom. So, we got pace. Second fastest pace. You love to see that. Obviously, this is the hole that this offense really needed to fill. They needed someone over the top to draw coverage away from CD so that CD could eat underneath. I also think that the fact that this rushing, or this backfield, I should say, could funnel more through CD than people realize. Was just trying to get the ball in his hands more quickly and more often around the line of scrimmage and just letting him do what he does from a yards after catch perspective. So the thing that I always kind of come back to here is that the Cowboys called 100 more passing plays than the Steelers last year. So the volume in general is going to look really good in terms of what we could see Pickens have here. You love to see that. Obviously, the Pickens, like I guess what I think of when I think of George Pickens is those deep balls from Russell Wilson last year. So his deep ball instincts are uncanny, according to head coach Brian Schottenheimer. But you know who throws one of the best deep balls in the league? Dak. This is like one of the perfect pairs. This is like one of those trades where as soon as it happens, it was like the best case scenario for a player like this. And I think his touchdown ceiling is actually pretty real as well. So if Prescott ends up scoring his 35-ish touchdowns, maybe even more, they're not all going to go to CD. Let's remember like what we saw from like a guy like Cooks, even not too long ago. He was scoring a ton of touchdowns. So I wouldn't be surprised if we end up getting like Devonta Smith level, maybe T. Higgins level production from a guy like this. And if you can get him in the sixth round, it's a home run. He's a guy I've probably taken more than anyone over the last few months. Yeah, it's just the perfect fit. So let's move on to our last player here. So our last player is another guy kind of in a similar mold, just a slightly different situation. Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams, you can get him around the 58 overall, the end of the fifth round. So you would probably have to reach on him slightly earlier than a guy like Pickens. But we do like this quite a bit. I think that the thing with JMO is that even though we started to see him kind of break out last year, I think there's still some room for ceiling. Still some room for ceiling. This is the exact point of your draft where you want to swing for upside, not safety, in my opinion. So he's going to be they're going to be letting him run more routes in general, not just downfield routes. So that's going to be great for his floor, but he still has that game breaking ability. He led all wide receivers with 40 plus yard catches. He had 5 TDs of 37 plus yards last year, which is completely insane. The yards after catch ability is obviously super strong. The Lions offense, I guess the concern is that the Lions offense might take a step back and that Goff's touchdown rate unlikely to repeat at the ceiling that we saw last year. So we definitely have some volatility here baked in, but still think that the upside from a guy like that in the late fifth round, I don't think anyone would be surprised if Jameson Williams ends up threatening to be a wide receiver one this year. even if we see a little bit of regression from this Detroit offense, I still think that in general we're going to see a ton of work for JMO, and he really had that breakout last year that I don't see him going back to anytime soon. So if you guys like this format, let me know. Love to hear about it in the comments. We'll do another one of these tomorrow. Ask any questions that you may have for your fantasy football draft, and I'll try and get to them as quickly as I can tomorrow. We'll go through some news, and if this is a format that you guys are enjoying, we'll keep running it and try and do a little bit more frequent long form videos and get a little bit smoother as we go here. But appreciate you guys. Definitely check out the video round by round, what I think are the best picks and the worst picks in each round. That video went out on Saturday, so you'll find it on the channel, and we'll catch you guys next time.